My wife changed the locks before I even made it home from the hardware store. I didn't learn that standing on my own porch. I learned it from a delivery driver named Derek. He stepped out of his van with a sealed envelope and an expression that said he wanted no part of what came next. "You're not going to like this," he said. "I figured I'd hand it to you instead of taping it to your door." I frowned. "Hand me what?" "Read it before you try to go inside, if you even can." He was already pulling away before I opened the envelope. Angela Ford and I had been married for 22 years. We'd spent 19 of those years building a software company from the unfinished basement of our Denver home. That journey had just ended with a $33 million acquisition offer from a private equity firm in Chicago. While I was buying a box of deck screws, my wife had hired a locksmith to erase my way back into the house. At the time, I thought the new locks were the betrayal. I had no idea something else would cut far deeper. I met Angela in a coffee shop back in 2005. The place is a poke bowl restaurant now. Funny how quickly the world replaces what once mattered. I was a mechanical engineering dropout working overnight shifts at a data center. She was finishing her MBA at the University of Denver. 8 months later, we were engaged. 2 years after that, we got married beside the lake at Washington Park because it was beautiful, simple, and free. Fieldstone Analytics was born from an idea I scribbled across a legal pad at 3 in the morning, trying to solve a routing problem that kept haunting me at work. I wrote the algorithm, filed the provisional patent myself because we couldn't afford an attorney, and my name went on it as the sole inventor, Mike Nelson. Angela took that invention and built a company around it. She created the presentations, mastered investor negotiations, and convinced people to believe in two inexperienced founders with more determination than credentials. She had a gift for it. I'll never deny that. Fieldstone existed because we both built it. I made the technology work. She made people believe in it. By 2015, we had 40 employees and an office in downtown Denver. Angela became CEO. I stayed head of engineering because I preferred solving problems over sitting through meetings. It felt like the right balance until the day she quietly decided the company's story only needed one hero. I remember exactly when it started. At a holiday party, a business reporter asked, "So, how did Fieldstone Analytics begin?" Angela smiled without looking at me. "I saw a gap in the logistics software market," she said, "and built a team to solve it." I was standing beside her, holding 2 drinks, one of them hers. She never mentioned my name. I told myself it was nothing more than a polished interview answer. Reporters wanted clean headlines, not stories about sleepless nights, kitchen tables, and legal pads. So I buried it and moved on. Looking back, that was my biggest mistake. When someone quietly takes credit for you once, it's rarely the last time. It starts so gradually you barely notice until your place in the story has almost disappeared. Our daughter, Sophie, was 24 then, living in Seattle. Remember her name, because before this is over, she'll become one of the few people willing to tell the truth. Everything unraveled the following Monday. I was rinsing out my coffee mug when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Priscilla. "Did you know about this?" Attached was a screenshot of an internal company memo announcing that Fieldstone Analytics had signed a letter of intent to be acquired by Continental Ridge Partners for $33 million. Every employee had already been notified. I hadn't. I called Angela immediately. She answered on the 4th ring, breathing hard. "Mike, I really can't talk right now. You sold our company, and I found out from Priscilla." A brief silence. "I was going to tell you tonight." "Tell me what?" "That the deal was happening, or that it had already happened. This isn't about us right now. This is business." I laughed once. "Not about us?" "Angela, I built the software this company exists to sell. I know that. No one's denying it. Feels like someone already has." She exhaled impatiently. "The Continental Ridge Partners are here. Can we discuss this tonight? Like adults?" "Sure," I said. Adults. She ended the call before I could say another word. In 24 years together, she'd never hung up on me first. It seemed like a small thing. It wasn't. 2 days later, Continental Ridge's due diligence team arrived at our office. 3 attorneys and a young associate spent hours pulling records while Priscilla quietly texted me updates from inside the building. "They're reviewing everything," she wrote. Ownership records, employment agreements, patent filings, every corporate document since 2007. Angela's barely left the conference room. I replied with one question. Have they asked about the intellectual property? Her answer came back almost instantly. It's scheduled for next week. Why? I stared at the screen before typing. No reason. Not yet. At the time, I didn't realize those two words would come back to haunt me. By Friday evening, Angela walked into our kitchen, sat across from me at the same table where Fieldstone Analytics had been born, folded her hands, and spoke as calmly as if she were discussing the weather. I want a divorce. Effective immediately. Immediately. I've already spoken with a family attorney. Given the acquisition, we need an accelerated separation. We? I asked. Or the deal? She didn't hesitate. Continental Ridge wants clean corporate optics. A public divorce during the acquisition creates unnecessary complications. I need you moved out before the weekend. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. You're ending a 22-year marriage. For optics? She met my eyes without flinching. I'm ending it because we haven't really been husband and wife for years. The timing is simply convenient. I leaned back in my chair. Which part wasn't real, Angela? The years I spent building the technology, or the years I stood beside you while you slowly rewrote the company's history until I disappeared from it? For the first time that night, she had no immediate answer. Angela didn't answer right away. That alone caught me off guard. She always had an answer. Finally, she said, That's not fair. Neither is replacing the locks before I've even packed a suitcase. She frowned. Nobody's changed the locks, Mike. Don't be dramatic. We'll see. I stood up. At the time, I meant it as a way to end the conversation. I didn't realize it would become a prediction. I need an answer tonight, she said. Are you going to make this difficult, or are you going to be reasonable? I'll be gone by Saturday, I replied. That's all you're getting from me tonight. She nodded. Thank you for not making this harder than it has to be. Don't thank me yet. Looking back, I remember every word she chose. Clean corporate optics, accelerated separation, transaction timeline. She never said she had stopped loving me. She never even admitted she wanted out. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being her husband and become another business problem waiting to be resolved. What I didn't know was that the acquisition she was trying so hard to protect already had a crack running through it. The evidence had been sitting for years inside a filing cabinet in a folder she'd never bothered to open. Saturday morning, while I was packing, my older brother Danny called from Fort Collins. Danny owns a landscaping company and has spent his whole life making fun of the fact that he doesn't understand a single thing I build. So she's really throwing you out? He asked. The way she explained it sounded like you both agreed. I smiled without meaning to. We agreed, the same way hostages agree. She named the terms. I picked the least painful option. Come stay with us. Kelly already has the guest room ready. She heard before you even called. Thanks, but I need to stay in Denver. Because of the divorce? No, because of the company. He went quiet. What happened? I looked at the stack of documents beside me. I found something in the paperwork. I don't know exactly what it means yet, but it's big. Mike, what did you find? Give me a couple of days. I'd rather know what I'm holding before I start talking. Danny laughed. You've always been like this. Dad used to say you'd announce the house was on fire with the same voice you'd use to tell everyone dinner was ready. He wasn't wrong. Then his voice turned serious. Just promise me one thing. Don't do something you'll regret because you're angry. This isn't about revenge, I said. And at that moment, I honestly believed it. A few hours later, I loaded 2 suitcases, my laptop, and a banker's box filled with the engineering notebooks that had documented nearly 2 decades of my work. Angela's assistant had already packed them for me. Thoughtful or efficient. I couldn't decide. I carried everything to the front porch, slipped my key into the lock, and turned. Nothing. The key fit perfectly. It just didn't belong there anymore. Angela had told the truth when she said the locks hadn't been changed. They simply weren't changed yet. I stood there staring at the front door I'd painted with my own hands 4 summers earlier. I expected anger. Instead, something colder settled in. And once that feeling arrived, it never really left. That feeling made the decision before I ever did. Instead of arguing, I checked into an extended stay hotel off East Colfax Avenue. It had a tiny refrigerator, a view of a gas station, and an ice machine that rattled through the night. I dropped my bags, opened my laptop, and finally did something I should have done years earlier. I pulled up every patent document connected to Fieldstone Analytics and read them line by line. Then, I compared every filing against the public records in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office database. What I found stopped me cold. The original provisional patent I'd filed in 2005 before the company even existed listed exactly one inventor, me. 2 years later, when we incorporated Fieldstone Analytics, our attorney prepared an intellectual property assignment transferring that provisional patent into the company in exchange for founders' equity. I remembered signing it. I remembered the notary. I remembered stacks of paperwork that all looked the same. At 29, building a business with the woman I loved, I never imagined I needed to read every page twice. But that assignment only covered the provisional filing. When the patent became a full utility patent in 2009, it required its own assignment. I found the issued patent. I found my inventor declaration. What I didn't find was any document transferring ownership of that issued patent to the company. I checked again, then a third time. Nothing. Under U.S. patent law, an issued patent belongs to its inventor unless it's formally assigned in writing and properly recorded. Fieldstone had spent 17 years telling investors, employees, customers, and now Continental Ridge, that it owned the company's core technology outright. According to the records, it didn't. I did. I leaned back in that cheap hotel chair, stared at the papers scattered across the bed, and let out a laugh that didn't sound anything like joy. 22 years of marriage, 19 years building a company together, and the one document Angela had never bothered to verify was the only thing standing between her and a $33 million payday. I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the discovery, asking myself the same question over and over. Was exposing this an act of revenge, or simply telling the truth? By sunrise, I still didn't have the answer, but I knew who did. My first call wasn't to a divorce attorney. It was to Thomas Adams, a patent lawyer whose name I remembered because years earlier he'd brought a giant mastiff named Eden to a company barbecue. Funny what sticks in your memory. Monday morning, I sat across from Thomas with every document spread across his conference table: the 2005 provisional patent, the 2007 assignment, the 2009 issued patent, and the empty space where the final assignment should have been. I didn't say a word at first. I simply slid the papers toward him and waited for someone else to tell me I wasn't imagining what I'd found. Thomas stopped talking and started reading. The farther he got into the documents, the slower he turned each page. Finally, he looked up. Walk me through this one more time. You filed the provisional patent yourself before the company even existed? 2005, I said. He tapped the next document. And this 2007 assignment. You're certain this is everything? No amendment? No later filing? I checked the USPTO records myself Sunday night. The provisional assignment is there. The assignment for the issued patent isn't. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. Do you understand what that means? I think so. Tell me anyway. I took a breath. Fieldstone has been telling investors and now Continental Ridge that it owns the company's core patent outright. Legally, it doesn't. I do. Thomas nodded once. Exactly. And during due diligence, Continental Ridge's lawyers will verify ownership. That's standard procedure. They'll find this gap. How long do we have? Days. Maybe less. I stared at the stack of papers. What do I actually own here? I'm not trying to destroy Angela. I just want to know what's mine. Thomas didn't hesitate. You own the one signature this deal can't close without. No one can transfer, license, or sell that patent unless you sign a valid assignment. Right now, you're the only person who can clear the title. The room went quiet. What if I do nothing? I asked. Then you give away an asset worth millions to a company that just locked you out of your own home. He wasn't trying to persuade me. He was simply reading the law back to me. I looked down at the patent with my name printed across the first page. I don't want revenge, I said softly. I just want someone to admit I was here. Thomas closed the file. Then let's make the paperwork tell the truth. Because right now, the company exists because of your invention. Yet on paper, you've been reduced to a footnote. He was right about more than he realized. I hadn't spent years hiding some secret weapon, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. I discovered the mistake only after my wife ended our marriage, pushed me out of my own house, and treated me like I no longer mattered. 3 days later, the document she'd never bothered to verify became the one thing standing between her and the biggest deal of her career. On Wednesday, 6 days after the acquisition was announced, and 3 days after I'd been served divorce papers, Thomas sent a formal legal notice to Continental Ridge's attorneys and Fieldstone's board. It stated one simple fact. The company's core patent had never been properly assigned, and as its sole legal owner, I had not approved any transfer, license, or sale. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Priscilla. "Mike, you won't believe what just happened." "Try me," I replied. Continental Ridge's lead attorney walked into the boardroom holding your notice. He looked straight at Angela and asked, "Who is Mike Nelson to this company?" I could almost picture the room. What did she say? There was a long pause before the next message appeared. Nothing. Not at first. Everyone just stared at her. Then one of the partners said, "I thought this was supposed to be a straightforward acquisition." The room went completely silent. And then, eventually, she called you a former technical advisor. I read those 4 words over and over. Former technical advisor. After 19 years of building the technology that made the company possible, that was the title she'd chosen for me. I started typing a reply, then erased it. Some conversations were too big for a text message. The acquisition didn't collapse that afternoon. Deals worth $33 million don't die in a single meeting. First, they stopped breathing. Continental Ridge froze the closing process, and the bank preparing to release the purchase funds suspended everything until ownership of the company's most valuable asset could be proven beyond dispute. Priscilla told me Angela stayed at the office until nearly 2 o'clock that Wednesday morning with the company's outside attorneys, searching for a way around the problem. The problem just happened to have my name printed across every critical document. There wasn't a workaround. Before Angela reached out, someone else did. Continental Ridge's lead counsel, Elaine Foster, called Thomas and asked to speak with both of us. She'd flown in from Chicago, expecting to close a $33 million acquisition. Instead, she was dealing with a deal that no longer had a closing date. Thomas put the call on speaker. Elaine wasted no time. "Mr. Nelson, I'll be direct. My client isn't interested in a prolonged ownership dispute. We review hundreds of acquisitions every year. When we discover a defect like this, we ask 2 questions. Can it be fixed? And what will it cost?" "Fair enough," I said. "I'm not looking for a fight. I want the ownership records to reflect reality. And I want to be treated like the person who actually owns this patent." "Understood," she replied. "For your own awareness, our due diligence team considers issues like this among the highest legal risks in any acquisition. We see it more often than you'd expect with husband and wife founders. One builds the technology, the other runs the business, and eventually everyone assumes the paperwork must be correct, because no one imagines they'd ever need to question each other." She paused before continuing. "Trust is usually what creates the gap. What happens if I refuse to sign?" I asked. "Then Continental Ridge withdraws immediately. Without clear ownership of the company's core intellectual property, we cannot proceed. That's not a negotiation tactic, Mr. Nelson. That's standard corporate practice. Every week this remains unresolved increases costs for everyone involved, including you, if an agreement is eventually reached." Then she thanked us for our time and ended the call. Thomas looked across the table. "She's telling the truth, and she's taking you seriously. If they thought they could buy you off with a token payment, she never would have called personally." I rubbed my eyes. "None of this feels like winning." "Because it isn't," Thomas said. "You're not trying to destroy a company. You're trying to correct a record." He was right. The real mistake hadn't happened that week. It had happened 17 years earlier, when 2 people who trusted each other stopped checking the details because they believed trust was enough. In business, paperwork doesn't care how much you love someone. By the following Friday, exactly 1 week after Angela had told me to be out of the house before the weekend, my phone rang. It was her. Her voice sounded different this time, calmer but no longer confident. We need to meet, she said. This is serious. I know. Can we talk in person? Sure, I replied. But first, answer one question. Did you ever actually read the patent filings? Silence. Not the silence of someone choosing the right words. The silence of someone realizing there weren't any. It lasted long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. In 19 years of running the company she'd helped build, Angela had never once looked at the single document that determined who legally owned the technology she was about to sell. There wasn't any reason to read it, Angela finally said. I trusted our lawyer handled everything back in 2007. He handled part of it, I replied. The rest was never finished. And no one noticed because no one ever bothered to ask me. Another long silence. Then she asked the question she'd been holding back. Are you doing this to punish me? I'm not doing anything, Angela. I'm just the first person who actually read the paperwork. Her voice tightened. This is going to cost me the entire deal. Do you understand that? 19 years of work. Gone because of one missing filing. 19 years of our work, I corrected. And it isn't gone. It just isn't free anymore. What does that mean? It means we'll talk tomorrow. Bring your attorney. I'll bring mine. Fine. She hung up. Again, no goodbye. The next afternoon, we met at a diner on South Broadway. I deliberately chose somewhere neither of us had memories attached to. The coffee was forgettable. The pie looked better than it tasted, and Angela looked like she hadn't slept in days. She slid into the booth and got straight to it. You could have called me instead of blowing up the acquisition. I looked at her for a second. You could have called me before changing the locks while I was buying deck screws. She lowered her eyes. For once, there wasn't a quick response waiting. I'm not trying to destroy what you built, I said. I helped build it too. In case you've forgotten. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Then, what do you want? The truth. I leaned forward. I want you to say, out loud, that you were about to sell technology you didn't legally own. And the only reason anyone found out is because I opened a file you never bothered to read. She stared at the table for what felt like a full minute. Finally, she whispered, You're right. I never checked. I should have. It wasn't much, but it was the first honest thing she'd said to me since this all began. So what now? She asked. Your lawyers act like I'm accusing you of fraud. I'm not, I said. Thomas explained this to them the same way he explained it to me. This isn't fraud. It's incomplete paperwork, but it's paperwork only I can fix. She looked up. Then fix it. I shook my head. Not because you finally asked, and not for free. Something changed in her expression. You've changed, Mike. No, I answered quietly. I finally stopped signing things without reading them. Before that meeting, Thomas had been careful to explain exactly what my legal position was. I didn't own Fieldstone Analytics. I couldn't demand the entire $33 million or take over the company. What I owned was the patent at the heart of everything Fieldstone sold. Federal law gave me one simple right. I could refuse to transfer it, license it somewhere else, or negotiate fair compensation before assigning it to a buyer. Continental Ridge's attorneys had already made their position crystal clear. Without my signed, notarized assignment, the acquisition would never close. That didn't give me revenge. It gave me something I'd been missing for years, a seat at the table where decisions about my own work were finally being made again. The negotiations lasted 11 days. Real negotiations aren't dramatic. Nobody pounds the table, storms out, then comes back an hour later with a better offer. They move one email, one phone call, and one legal draft at a time. Angela's opening offer arrived through her attorney. $200,000 in exchange for my immediate assignment of the patent. The letter described it as a generous gesture in light of our marriage. Thomas read it over speakerphone, then laughed. That's an expensive-looking insult, he said. Mike, that patent is the heart of the entire acquisition. Without it, there is no $33 million deal. You're not signing paperwork. You're transferring the asset they're actually buying. So what do we ask for? I said. Something that reflects reality. Despite what people might assume, I never demanded half the sale price. That wouldn't have been fair either. Angela and the team had spent years building customers, hiring employees, and growing the business around the technology. My contribution wasn't the whole company. But it also wasn't worth pretending it was just another signature. Our proposal had three parts. First, the patent records would finally recognize everyone who genuinely deserved credit, including two engineers whose improvements over the years had never been acknowledged. Second, I would assign my ownership rights to Continental Ridge in exchange for $6 million. Third, I would receive a modest royalty for the remaining life of the patent, reflecting the continuing value of the technology after the acquisition closed. Angela's legal team rejected it almost immediately. "This is extortion," one of her attorneys said during a conference call. Thomas didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "No," he replied calmly. "This is federal patent law. My client legally owns the patent your client has represented as company property for 17 years. You're free to dislike the number, counselor. That doesn't change who owns the asset." He paused just long enough for the silence to settle in. "If your client wants to explain to Continental Ridge why a $33 million acquisition collapsed over a $200,000 offer, that's her decision." On the sixth day, they raised the offer to $3 million. We declined. On day 8, they returned with $4.5 million and a reduced royalty, hoping one concession would offset the other. I looked at Thomas. "Maybe this is enough." He shook his head before I finished speaking. "Hold your position. Every day they keep negotiating instead of walking away. Tells you the patent matters more than they're willing to admit. Leverage cuts both ways." By the 10th day, Angela called me herself for the first time since the negotiations had started. "Can we talk?" "Just 5 minutes. No lawyers." "I'm listening." Her voice sounded exhausted. "I'm not arguing because you're wrong about the patent. I'm arguing because if I accept your terms, I'm admitting in writing that I ran this company for 19 years without realizing it didn't legally own its own core technology." She stopped, then quietly added, "Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" "Yes," I answered honestly. "I do." Another silence settled between us. "But it's true whether you admit it or not. Signing the agreement doesn't create the mistake. It just fixes it before it destroys everything you've built." She took a slow breath. "You could have stayed quiet," she said. "You could have let the sale go through and never told anyone." I looked out the hotel window at the traffic crawling below before answering. "After everything that happened, why would you expect me to protect a lie that erased me?" "You would have had nothing to bargain with," Angela said quietly, "but at least you wouldn't have embarrassed me in front of an entire room of Chicago lawyers." I nodded. I could have done that. But the moment I stood on my own porch with a key that no longer fit the lock, I stopped feeling responsible for protecting your comfort. She didn't argue. She couldn't. Later, Priscilla filled in the part of the story I never witnessed. The real turning point hadn't come during one of our conversations. It happened inside a board meeting. Two of Fieldstone's earliest investors, the men who had backed us back in 2011 and watched their investment grow for more than a decade, finally lost patience. We met for coffee a few weeks later, and Priscilla told me exactly what she'd heard. "They were done waiting," she said. One of the board members, Harold, the quiet one who barely ever speaks, looked straight at Angela and said, "You're letting your pride put a $33 million acquisition at risk. Give Mike what he's asking for and close this deal before Continental Ridge walks away on its own." She said the room went silent. Angela didn't argue. She simply nodded. 2 days later, her attorneys accepted our proposal, almost exactly as we'd presented it on the first day. $6 million, the royalty agreement, and the corrected patent records. We signed the final documents on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after a confused delivery driver handed me the notice that ended my marriage. Thomas sat beside me. Angela's attorney sat beside her. Most of the meeting passed in silence. While the notary prepared the paperwork, Angela looked over and asked softly, "You really didn't plan any of this, did you?" I almost smiled. "No. My plan was to buy deck screws, grill dinner on the back deck, and go to bed early. You're the one who changed the script." She lowered her eyes. When the assignment reached me, my hand trembled as I signed. Not because I was nervous, but because for the first time since 2005, the invention I'd created finally felt like it legally belonged to the person who had actually built it. 9 days later, the acquisition officially closed. $33 million changed hands. Angela kept the house. I never fought for it. In the end, The house wasn't what I'd been trying to reclaim. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted the truth recorded somewhere that couldn't be rewritten. And this time, it was. While everything was wrapping up, Sophie flew home from Seattle. We met at the same diner where Angela and I had negotiated. Somewhere along the way, I'd grown strangely fond of their pie. Sophie stirred her coffee for a moment before asking, "Are you happy, Dad?" I thought about it longer than she probably expected. "I'm not happy your mom and I are over," I said. "I loved her for a long time. Part of me probably always will. Some places stay with you even after you've moved out of them." I looked out the window before continuing. "But I'm not sorry I finally stopped disappearing inside something I helped build. That's the part I can live with." Sophie smiled. "For what it's worth, I always knew the algorithm was yours." I looked back at her. "You did?" She nodded. "Mom used to talk about it in interviews like it just appeared one day. But I remember watching you build it. I was 7. You even let me hold the soldering iron once." I laughed. "Your mother almost had a heart attack over that." Sophie grinned. "She still doesn't know you let me do it twice." For the first time in weeks, we both laughed. A real laugh. The kind that reminds you life doesn't always rebuild itself all at once. Sometimes it starts with a single honest conversation. Sophie reached across the table and rested her hand on mine. "Can I ask you one more thing?" "Always." "Do you regret not checking the paperwork years ago?" I smiled to myself. "A little. Every day, actually. But if I'd caught it back then and quietly fixed it, your mother and I never would have been forced to face what we'd become. Sometimes it takes a crack in the foundation before anyone admits the house needs attention." Sophie laughed. "That's surprisingly wise for the man who once tried to repair our dishwasher with a butter knife." "For the record," I said, "that dishwasher worked for another 6 years." She rolled her eyes. "I always wondered why you never fought harder for credit. At work, in interviews, everywhere." I shrugged. "Because I thought good work eventually speaks for itself. Turns out it doesn't. Sometimes, if your name isn't attached to the work, someone else ends up owning the story." She nodded thoughtfully. "So, what's next?" "Now, I get to build something where no one has to wonder whose name belongs on it." I used part of the settlement to start the business I'd dreamed about since my 20s, a small engineering consulting firm, with 2 contractors and a modest office in Denver's Baker neighborhood, just a few miles from the house I'd left behind. We help smaller companies solve routing and logistics problems, the kind too small to interest giant investment firms. I love the work. More importantly, every agreement has my name exactly where it belongs. 4 months after the acquisition closed, Priscilla resigned from Fieldstone and joined my new company. During her first week, while we were unpacking boxes, she stopped what she was doing and looked at me. "I need to tell you something, and you might hate me afterward." "That's an ambitious way to start a Monday," I said. She took a breath. "I found the patent assignment problem 18 months before you did." I froze. "What?" "I was cleaning old corporate records for an internal audit. I noticed the issued patent never had a matching assignment. I knew exactly what it meant." I slowly set the folders in my hands onto the desk. "You knew all that time?" She nodded. I kept quiet. "Angela passed me over for promotion twice and promised me more equity both times. Neither promise ever happened. I convinced myself I was staying loyal. Looking back, I think I was just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For a moment when it actually mattered." She looked me straight in the eye. "The day the acquisition memo went out, I sent you that screenshot on purpose. I wanted you reading those patent files before anyone could close the deal without you." I stood there replaying everything in my head, the unexpected text, the updates during due diligence, every message she'd sent afterward. They hadn't been random acts of kindness. Priscilla had seen the missing piece long before I ever did. She simply waited until the one moment when it could no longer be ignored. "Are you angry?" she finally asked. I thought about it longer than she probably expected. "I'm trying to decide if I should be." She stayed quiet. "You didn't lie to me," I finally said. "You just let me believe I'd discovered something on my own." She nodded. "If I'd told you 18 months earlier, would anything really have been different?" I turned the question over in my mind before answering. "No. Back then I would have fixed the paperwork, gone back to work, and kept pretending everything else was fine." Sometimes the truth doesn't matter until people are finally forced to live with it. And that was the real lesson I carried away from everything that happened. The missing patent assignment didn't end my marriage. It exposed a marriage that had already been quietly unraveling for years. The paperwork wasn't what broke us. It simply refused to keep hiding what we had both stopped seeing. That's why, if you ever build something worth protecting, whether it's a business, a partnership, or a family, don't assume trust replaces honesty. And don't assume your contribution will always speak for itself. Give your work the credit it deserves while you still have the chance. Because reclaiming your name after someone else has rewritten the story is always far harder than writing it correctly the first time. Looking back, I don't think anything would have changed. I still would have opened that folder. I still would have called Thomas. I still would have forced myself to face the truth. The only difference was that Priscilla made sure I looked before it was too late. She let out a long breath. So, we're okay? I smiled. We're okay. But from now on, if you ever find something important, you tell me the same day. No more silent partnerships. She laughed. Deal. There are stories where one person saves the day alone. This isn't one of them. The truth is, two people who had both been quietly overlooked in different ways ended up giving each other exactly what was needed at exactly the right moment. Priscilla gave me a reason to start asking questions. I happened to be the only person with the legal right to answer them. Neither of us planned it. That's just how life unfolded. 2 months after the acquisition closed, Angela and I finalized our divorce. I heard through Priscilla that Continental Ridge kept her on as a transition advisor for a while before quietly moving on. Beyond that, I honestly don't know what happened to her. At some point, I stopped looking. Some chapters don't need sequels. When I think back to that cheap hotel room overlooking the gas station, I realize I believe the biggest loss in my life was a marriage. It wasn't. The biggest loss would have been accepting a version of my own story, where my name no longer mattered. Angela could change the locks. She could keep the house. She could even sell the company we built together. But there was one thing she couldn't rewrite: the truth. My name had always been on the patent. It had always been there in black and white, waiting for someone to finally read it. That's the strange thing about the truth. You can ignore it. You can postpone it. You can even build an entire company around pretending it doesn't exist. But eventually, someone opens the right folder, and the truth is still there, exactly where it has always been. And sometimes, one signature is enough to remind the world who really helped write the story.